Just a few months ago, this man was a regular pharmaceutical industry executive. But one event convinced him to go public on his old employer.
My name is Bernard Dalbergue. I'm a medical doctor and I worked for 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry. In my last job, I was in charge of medical affairs for the Merck and Company group. Basically, I represented the laboratory's medical conscience and expertise for the drugs that I was in charge of.
A unique testimony that sheds new light on drug scandals that recently made headlines.
Le groupe pharmaceutique américain Merck a été condamné par un tribunal du Texas à verser une indemnité de 253 millions de dollars.
A behind-the-scenes look at the world's third largest pharmaceutical company.
C'est un anti-inflammatoire parmi les plus consommés au monde qui a été retiré du marché hier. Un coup dur pour le laboratoire américain Merck qui plonge à la bourse.
It's a sector driven by marketing that exploits loopholes in the healthcare system and uses the extreme lobbying we're about to discover. Bernard Dalbergue's story takes us on a journey into an unknown world, and yet this world controls a huge part of our health. Bernard Dalbergue joined the Merck Group in 2009, 2 years after the international launch of a vaccine aimed at becoming what the industry calls a blockbuster, a product that brings in over $1 billion a year. Its name was Gardasil. Presented as a major breakthrough, this vaccine would be supported, despite doubts, by nearly every political representative in the world.
Gardasil is a vaccine developed to fight viruses called HPV. These are viruses that have been shown to cause cancer, in particular cervical cancer in women. The problem is that Gardasil was sold, and continues to be sold, by making people believe in a wonderful medical fairy tale, that it will eliminate the HPV epidemic, the epidemic of viral cancers. But the frequency of this cancer, to put it in simple terms, is diminishing every year. It cannot be called an epidemic.
Before commercializing this vaccine, Merck launched a series of clinical trials in several American hospitals under the leadership of major researchers.
They did not have expertise within the companies to be able to develop this clinically.
Diane Harper is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on the HPV virus.
They asked the small number of international experts, of which I was one, to help them design the trials, design what would be appropriate for human endpoints, and design how those trials should be put together that was safe and protected the person who was entering into the trial. So I became the largest enroller in the United States in the phase 2 trial. Much data, many publications on it. The whole goal of developing the vaccine was so that we could get prevention of cervical cancer.
Proving the efficacy of a vaccine is a complex process, especially when it's about preventing an emergence of cancer. Merck and other in-house researchers therefore worked diligently to prove that the vaccine eliminated 4 specific viruses responsible for the majority of cervical cancers.
The vaccine was close to 100% effective, or I should say efficacious. We were very excited, and then Merck told us how they were going to take it and move it from there. And that became very scary. That became It was an incredibly organized way of reaching every possible organization there could be that could have any effect on making decisions about vaccination and making sure that people's responses were going to be, yes, we want Gardasil.
In 2006, Merck received market approval for the vaccine in the United States. It then began an unprecedented campaign to make cervical cancer a national and international cause, and to convince people that Gardasil was the solution to eradicating this illness. The first target for lobbyists were American politicians. A few months later, Rick Perry, the newly elected Republican governor of Texas, was the first to declare a federal law mandating vaccination for all young women in his state. He made a solemn announcement during his inauguration.
At the forefront of a new era of prosperity, its arrival. For the first time ever, we have a vaccine that can prevent a cancer that prevents the spread of HPV, the leading cause of cervical cancer in women. I refuse to look a young woman in the eye who suffers from this form of cancer and tell her that we could have stopped it, but we didn't. I'm going to err on the side of protecting life.
As governor, Rick Perry made an executive order that all young girls age 12 were mandated to get the vaccine Gardasil made by Merck.
A few years ago, Roy Poses created a foundation for transparency in scientific research.
Also, Rick Perry received considerable 5 figures in US dollars contributions from a political action committee identified with Merck. And third, Rick Perry's former chief of staff was hired by Merck to be a lobbyist. So we have 2 kinds of influence. We have the donation and we have the revolving door. And we have an action, which I'd say is a fairly strong action by government to influence the use of a particular product.
The first person to publicly reveal these close relations was a female politician in Rick Perry's own camp. During a televised debate between Republican presidential candidates, Michelle Bachmann openly accused the governor of playing into the laboratory's hands.
I raise about $30 million.
That we cannot forget that in the midst of this executive order, there was a big drug company that made millions of dollars because of this mandate. We can't deny that.
What are you suggesting?
What I'm saying is that it's wrong for a drug company because the governor's former chief of staff was the chief lobbyist for this drug company. The drug company gave thousands of dollars in political donations to the governor, and this is just flat out wrong. Right. The question is it about life or was it about millions of dollars and potentially billions for a drug company?
In 2007, Rick Perry was far from being the only politician to publicly endorse Gardasil. All over the world, in just a few weeks, dozens of parliamentarians were suddenly raising the issue of mass vaccination for cervical cancer.
De mogelijke vaccinatie tegen het humaan papillomavirus. Volla information om HPV-vaccinationen.
Monsieur le ministre, en France, le cancer du col de l'utérus atteint chaque année 3000 femmes et cause la mort de 1000 d'entre elles.
In Europe, the drug was given market approval for the entire continent. For several years already, these decisions had been made by the European Medicines Agency and not the individual states.
The European Medicines Agency is first and foremost an organization that's 80% financed by the pharmaceutical laboratories.
Michel Rivasi is a member of the European Parliament She's part of the health committee based in Brussels.
80% of this agency's revenue comes from pharmaceutical laboratories requesting market approvals. Only 20% comes from Europe. In other words, when you request a market approval, you pay to get it. And that constitutes, if you will, your share of the agency's funding. That means the more drugs the agency authorizes, the more money it receives via the pharmaceutical labs. And that's very important, because the way an agency is funded is something that allows you to assess its independence. For me, there's no guarantee that when market approval is given, it means that a drug has any real added value.
I think that a lot of politicians, not just in France but in all of Europe, allowed themselves to be deluded by a kind of medical fairy tale in which the dream had finally become real. We had the first anti-cancer vaccine. Of course, we all wanted to believe that, but unfortunately, the medical reality of numbers and facts showed that wasn't the case at all.
Objectively and scientifically speaking, no one can know the real efficacy of this vaccine. A politician might have some knowledge of health and say, no, there's something wrong with that. But since politicians tend to believe whatever anyone in a white lab coat says, they don't react. Our society dances to the tune of the all-powerful lobbies. And the states are simply there to implement the agenda of the lobbies. It's unbelievable.
All over Europe, doctors are divided about Gardasil. Some are strong advocates, while others have serious doubts about its efficacy. In Spain, officials voted to vaccinate the local youth. Yet the country is one of the least affected by the HPV virus and cervical cancer. A baffling public health decision in the eyes of hundreds of researchers.
Each country has its own history of health and its own sexual practices. Controlling the relation between human beings and these viruses is an absolutely unobtainable pipe dream.
Carlos Alvarez Darde is one of the first doctors to have been shocked by the behavior of his country's leaders.
Before the first scientific articles were even published, a congresswoman asked when we were going to launch the vaccine, which means that she had inside information. She was promoting the vaccine in Parliament. And at that point, we published an article in a Spanish newspaper asking for a moratorium on the vaccine. Half of the country's public health doctors signed, saying the vaccine wasn't suitable. We did a study, and it demonstrated that to save one life with Gardasil, it would cost the state 8 million euros.
One of the people who signed this open letter was Ildefonso Hernández Aguado, one of Spain's top researchers.
It was clear that right from the start, decisions were being influenced by vested interests.
Ildefonso Hernández Aguado participated directly in the Gardasil debates.
Who decides the scientific agenda? The pharmaceutical companies. That's what I noticed when I came to the ministry. The political agenda was controlled through a series of imperceptible actions, actions that seemed completely natural. And companies influence politicians every time they need to. That way, they say they're in control of the situation. In reality, when they do this, they influence politicians at every level of power, from the head of state down to the bottom of the ladder if necessary. That's the way they do it. It was particularly visible in people I knew personally, who were directly pressured to change their opinion in support of the pharmaceutical industry.
You saw this?
I saw it directly, yes.
In Spain and across the globe, once Gardasil had the backing of the authorities, Merck launched a publicity campaign that was unprecedented for a vaccine.
Aujourd'hui, avec le vaccin Gardasil, vous pouvez mieux la protéger contre certains virus responsables du cancer du col de l'utérus.
With a slogan hammered out in every language, every vaccinated girl is one cervical cancer victim less.
It could prevent hundreds of deaths from cervical cancer in the UK every year.
When Merck started pushing the marketing so hard, they started to publicly make statements of, your daughter will be one less with vaccination. I talked to them and said, this isn't appropriate. And they said, fear sells. If we make moms afraid of the disease, they'll vaccinate their daughters. And they said, that's our business, not yours. It became very clear to me that Merck appears to have lost their public health purpose, and that their potential profit and reporting to their shareholders has become more important for Gardasil than what it really can do for the public.